I've been to church regularly since before I was born. And that means I've sat through my fair share of children's talks as I was growing up. One of the earliest and most repeated of those that I remember is about a boy who made a model boat. He spent hours on making it, and eagerly he took it down to the sea to play with it, only to see it swept away. He was devastated. Imagine his surprise then when, a short time later, he saw his boat for sale in a shop window. He went in and pleaded with the shop owner, "That's my boat." The shop owner wouldn't give it back. He had bought it from someone else after all. But the boy loved the boat he had made so much that he bought it back. He made it. He lost it. He bought it back. And God made you. He lost you. He bought you back. That was the message of that children's talk, which you may well have heard before. And in Jesus, he has made it possible to use the more technical language for you to be redeemed. And the thought of being redeemed is central to Ruth chapter 3. Let's recap for a moment. In chapter 1, we find Elimelech, Naomi and their family leaving Bethlehem at a time of famine in search of a better life. In Moab, sadly, Elimelech dies and his two sons marry local women. 10 years on, also very sadly, the sons die and the three women are all left as widows. Naomi decides to return to her own people, giving her two daughters-in-law the option to stay behind among their own people. Orpah does so, but Ruth follows Naomi to Bethlehem. In chapter 2, we find Naomi and Ruth apparently in need of the local food bank. This is to be found in the fields, gleaning for ears of corn overlooked by those harvesting. Ruth finds favour with Boaz, a relative, as it turns out, of her late father-in-law. And through the harvests of barley and wheat she gleans, and it seems that she gets to know Boaz much better. Now, in chapter 3, we find Naomi hatching a plan to find a home for her loyal daughter-in-law Ruth. So Ruth is to wash and perfume herself and put on her best clothes, just as a bride would do for a new husband, then to go and lie at the feet of Boaz, a close family relative, through her marriage. Ruth does so, with Boaz sleeping deeply, full of food and drink after a day's threshing of the barley crop out in the fields. As instructed by Naomi, she uncovers his feet and lies down. Suddenly, and surprised, and probably suffering from cold feet, Boaz wakes up. "Who are you?" he says through the deep darkness. She replies, "I'm your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you're a kinsman redeemer of our family." Boldly, her proposal of marriage is made. Now, if this were a question of sport, we might be asking, what happened next? As Steve has outlined, the language used here is full of ambiguity. Has Naomi manipulated Ruth? Is Ruth complying willingly? Does Boaz take advantage of her through the rest of the night? From all that we know so far of Ruth and Boaz, it seems that she is a decent woman and he is an honourable man. There seems no doubt that Naomi sees an opportunity, but it seems likely that Ruth and Boaz did not jump the gun, so to speak, in terms of their possible nuptials. Instead, they wait for the resolution of Boaz's role as a kinsman redeemer. Now, last week, Steve outlined some scriptures relating to the kinsman or guardian redeemer in the Old Testament. I'll probably repeat a little of that, but I want to say that fundamentally, the Hebrew concept of goel, that we translate as kinsman redeemer, is a relative who acts for another person in the family circle at a time of crisis. So the goel is one who redeems property, You can read more about that in Leviticus 25. When a person becomes poor and has to sell property, the nearest relative is to redeem what has been sold. And Naomi appears to be in need, and she is selling land that was her husband's. I'm trying not to spoil the plot for John, who's preaching on Ruth 4 next week, but the land will be bought by a relative. If you read Leviticus 25, you'll find that this is God's provision to ensure that land stays with the people of God. It's a reminder that it is really his land and not theirs. Who owns your land, your home? It might be you, it might be a relative or a landlord, but really it belongs to God. Graciously, he allows you to have it. It might be your possession, but if you are his possession, redeemed by him, how might you use your home, what you possess, for his glory? Boaz discreetly provided food for Ruth as she was gleaning his land. And I think this book of Ruth causes us to ask how we offer hospitality to those we know and those we don't, through that with which the Lord has blessed us. We also find that the girl is one who redeems people. If a person becomes poor and has to sell himself to a rich foreigner living among the people, a relative may redeem them. Might that have been facing Naomi before she returned from Moab, and now facing Ruth as a foreigner in Bethlehem, perhaps selling themselves into slavery? And yet, as the story develops, we find that Ruth is redeemed by her close relative. How might we follow the example of the kinsman redeemer here? We have a family, don't we? And it is ultimately the whole human race. We can't personally redeem all, but we can help some. The past week has brought the powerful example of Marcus Rashford onto the front pages of the papers. As a Manchester United and England footballer, he's more used to being on the back pages. But during the lockdown, he's been active in Manchester working for the Fair Share food charity, as they've raised £20 million or so to feed children who, if they were at school, would be getting free school meals. Well, that was mostly under the radar. But then, as we know, this 22-year-old has used his profile to speak out and force the government to back down over plans not to extend free school meals for school children into the summer holidays. He knows from personal experience in a one-parent family how important free school meals were to him and his siblings. And without this U-turn of the government that has been brought about, those children might have become even more enslaved to poverty. It is a truly impressive and moving example from an impressive young man. Here's a challenge to you and to me. Ask God, how can I make a difference right now and bring hope to some? Even just to one. That'll make a difference. And let's see where God leads. So the girl is one who redeems property and people, but neither of these things actually require a kinsman redeemer to marry Ruth. No, that comes from Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 to 10, where we find that if a woman's husband is to die without leaving a son, it's the brother-in-law's responsibility to marry her and father a child for the dead man, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. In Ruth's time, this responsibility seems to be extended to close family members also. Plot spoiler alert, but I think you know anyway. Ruth will get married, and there will be a son who will be grandfather of King David and an ancestor to Jesus, the son of David and the Son of God. And that takes us to Jesus. You see, for us, there is a Redeemer. And in many ways, Boaz becomes an Old Testament type for Jesus. See, Jesus is related to us by blood, a human being who made himself nothing. Found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And only his blood could pay for our blood guilt. And Jesus is able to pay the price by his precious blood, a lamb without blemish or defect, as 1 Peter chapter 1 tells us. And Jesus is willing to redeem us. For, as Matthew 20:28 says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. You may not have had to sell property to make ends meet, or yourself. But I wonder if there are things in life that you have sold out to. Things to which you're enslaved. Things from which you would like and you need to be free. Jesus is willing to redeem you, to set you free. Ask him and seek the power of his Spirit to lead you into freedom. Finally, 3 more things. There was a closer kinsman redeemer than Boaz who would have done for Ruth. For us, only Jesus will do. It was Ruth's initiative under Naomi's guidance that she lie down at the feet of a kinsman redeemer. It is God's initiative in Jesus Christ that we can meet him at the foot of the cross. And thirdly, through Jesus, our kinsman redeemer, God, who loves us more than we can know, says, I made you. I lost you. I bought you back.